After this last part, and with the other creation stories in mind, let's look a little bit and think a little bit about how was it in the beginning? What was the pre-creation state like? And there are a number of theories around, but they also have to do a little bit with how we understand the Hebrew language and what we understand the text to mean. If you look at this, it says in the beginning, in verse 1, God created the skies and the land. Now, there are a number of options. You could either say, this verse is the first thing that happened, and in the beginning is one point. This is where it started, the beginning. And then God created everything. Now, there are a number of problems we have. One thing is a logical problem I pointed out in the beginning. If verse 1 is pointing to a beginning point, then verse 2 is a little strange, because then we have an earth that is formless and void. Later on, the heaven is actually created, and it states here that it would have been created already, and some other problems. So what is this verse 1, and what does the word beginning mean? The Hebrew word is reshit, and I try to make it short. It doesn't point to a point, but to a span, a period of time. In Job, his friends talk to Job about his reshit, but they don't mean his birth, but they mean the period of time before God restores him and before this happens. In Jeremiah, we have a story of the reshit, the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah. But later on, we have a verse that shows that this is already in the 4th year. So this word beginning is not pointing to the first day of his reign, but to the first period, to this whole time when Zedekiah started reigning. And so in Genesis, the beginning refers to a preliminary period of time rather than a first point in time. And this leads us to the conclusion that the beginning is a way of labeling the whole 7-day period of creation described that comes in the rest of Genesis 1, and it's not a point before the Tohu Vavohu. It provides an introduction, it's like a title to the creativity that comes in the rest of Genesis 1. And I hope that makes sense. This is it's a really important point because it shows us. Let me word it differently. If we say this is the beginning, then our biggest point that we will make is the beginning of matter. We say there was nothing, and then God created matter, and matter was, and usually we say then the universe and the planet, because this is what we understand heaven and earth to be. But all the ancient cosmologies were not about the creating of matter. What were the other Near Eastern beginning stories about? Was it about the material existence or about something else? And if it was about something else, then what? I want to argue that all these creation accounts are about function rather than matter, rather than material existence. Things are thought to exist only when they have a purpose and when they have a name in ancient cultures. And if this is true, then Genesis 1 is all about the purpose of the universe and not so much about the material creation. This doesn't mean that Yahweh is not the creator of all things out of nothing. I don't say that that's not true, but I say that this is not what Genesis 1 is about. You need to conclude that from other things, logically, philosophically, but I don't think that this is what Genesis 1 says. The Hebrew verb to create concerns the assignment of functions and not the material existence of the universe. What it means to create, what it means to make, completely depends already on your cosmology. We would say, oh, creation means matter. But this comes from our cosmology. Any ancient person would say, no, create means it has a function and a name. Something is there in a function and a form that hasn't been there before. Much like pottery. Pottery is not about creating the matter, but it's about forming the matter and giving it a purpose and a name. And we see that whenever God says it is good, it refers to functional goodness, specifically for humans. For example, on day 2, God doesn't say it's good, because it has no function for the human. Just some things that are nice to observe. Genesis 1 concerns the teleology, would be the term, the purpose of the cosmos for human habitation, that people can live in it, not material origins or the age of the universe. And because Genesis 1 is not concerned with the mechanisms of origin, how did it come, I say something a bit provoking, all scientific explorations are fully permitted, including divinely guided evolution or whatever. There might be arguments for it or against it, but Genesis 1 is not an argument against it. So the word in the beginning, Reshit, is not about the beginning point, but it's the title for what comes afterwards. Notice how verse 1 already describes an order of separated skies and land, and why is it gone in verse 2. The other thing, if you want to explain it otherwise, you need to come up with the gap theory or something and we can talk about that later when we come to the origin of evil and other things. Let's look a little bit what is meant with, when we start in verse 2, what do we have there again? We started already talking about this a little. The land was wild and waste. And these words, tohu vavohu, it means formless. So the first word, tohu, we have it in Deuteronomy, where it says he found him in a desert land in the howling tohu of a wilderness. So it's the picture of a desert. There's nothing there. It's no form. It's just sand. In Isaiah, it talks about the city of Tohu is broken down. Every house is shut up so that none may enter. There's an outcry in the streets. All joy turns to gloom. Desolation is left in the city. The gate is battered. Again, it's rubble. It's no form. There's nothing there. In Isaiah 45, God explicitly says, if you read it here, He's God, He who fashioned and made the earth, He founded it. He did not create it to be tohu, but formed it to be inhabited. He says, I am the Lord and there is no other. So tohu refers to something that has no form, a formless state. And then we have the vavohu, or the bohu. Oh, sorry, I didn't go there. That means empty. It's not filled. It's an empty vessel. There's nothing in there. Then we talked about the tehom, the deep abyss. Darkness, I don't need to explain. I think that's clear. The deep abyss, that appears several times. In Job, have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the tehom? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of deep darkness? So it's down, it's deep, it's where death is, it's where darkness is. Jonah goes down there. He says, water encompasses me to the point of death. The tehom engulfed me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I descended to the roots of the mountains. The earth with its bars was around me forever, but you have brought up my life from the pit. It's a symbol of death, of nothing, of darkness. It's horrible. And so Genesis 1:2 describes this pre-cosmic condition as it was understood in Israelite thought, as in the rest of the ancient world. The pre-creation state is not absence of matter, as the primordial waters are already present. They are the functionless cosmic waters, where order has not yet been imposed, the desert and cosmic waters above and below. And really notice that. It's a bit shocking, but we cannot say the Bible says in the beginning was nothing. In the beginning you actually have water. You have darkness. You have the tehom. And that, again, for me, that sometimes is a little shocking, because I read into the text what I want the text to say. And sometimes that's not very, very fair, because the text doesn't say there was nothing. I know that many theologians say God created, it's the word bara, and it means ex nihilo, but it's a bit of a circular argument. They say bara is only used by God, and because God is the only one who can create out of nothing, this is what the word means. It's not necessarily what the word means. And it's not what the text says if we look at it. Only if we turn Genesis 1:1 into this statement. But then the logical flow is completely broken, and it doesn't make any sense, especially not if we look at ancient cosmologies. So, another quote, just to get this, and it's a bit of a repetition. Very little in ancient Near Eastern cosmologies, including Genesis 1, relates to the manufacture of the material cosmos. Rather, they recount the organization and ordering of the elements of the cosmos as a functional whole. If we are going to understand ancient views about how the cosmos came into existence, it is essential that we understand ancient views about what constitutes existence. Creation ontology. I stop here quickly. Ontology is the beginning of things. Now, we would say a beginning is when you are created. There was no matter and now you're there. That's your beginning. That's your ontology. But in ancient times, existence only happened when you had a name and a function. I read on. In the ancient world, something came into existence when it was separated out as a distinct entity and given a function and a name. It's a function-oriented ontology. This is a real big contrast to our modern ontology, which is focused on the material existence or structure of something. For us, the existence of the world is perceived in physical, material terms. It's a substance-oriented ontology. For the ancient biblical authors, creation was about the establishment of the functioning cosmos, not about the origins of the material structure or substance of the cosmos. And this is really, really important that we notice that. It's a big, big difference. And notice that all these elements of chaos, these elements that we have in the beginning, you see this here, they have parallels in ancient Near Eastern cosmologies. And each one is separately addressed in the first 3 days of Genesis 1. So the darkness is addressed on day 1 with light, the waters are separated and ordered on day 2, and then we have the dry land and we have plants, so we have first things that have a function. Notice the parallels to other creation stories where things are named and made distinct. You see that again and again, that God names things. Also notice how God is naming things and then give this task to Adam later in Genesis 2. And sometimes we think, well, Adam gave names to the animals. I don't know what he named them, Peter, Paul, and Mary, or horse, chicken, and lion. You know, it makes no sense for us. But naming meant that you actually assign a function and a place to something. It entails much, much more than what we think. Also, naming things was the right of kings. When the Israelite kings were captured by the Babylonian rulers, they changed their names. They gave the kings new names. You remember that the names of Daniel and his 3 friends were changed. You know, we know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That were not the Israelite names. That's naming things. It's a right to rule, to change names. Naming also means you call things into existence, you bring things to a new state, a new birth. God calls later. He calls Abraham out of Ur. He calls his son out of Egypt. And these are stories of new beginnings or new creation. Later on in the Bible, God splits the sea, lets the people go on dry land and out the other side. And the people sing a song about how Yahweh is going to plant people on a garden mountain. That's Exodus 15. It is creation again. It's not just liberation of slaves. It's the motive of creation again. In Genesis 2, we see how God separates Adam and Eve, but then they are supposed to become one flesh again through covenant. And it seems that this creative power of God can splinter out into an infinite number of separate entities, and they can become unified again through covenant. And this is a really, really important part of the whole later story of the whole Bible. And this is a very, very important part for us as well. Remember, we are talking about the state before the fall. And so to make things distinct, to give things a purpose and a function, and then to relate them to each other through a covenant, through partnership, through love, and so make the world more and more complex, is a very, very important motive and something very important that people need to know. Not just that there was nothing and now there's stuff. That is a weak creation story, and we have more to offer to the world around us than just this.